The flight home crossed an ocean, but not a season. Summer still lingered over Washington. The familiar skyline emerged beneath scattered clouds as the aircraft descended toward Reagan National Airport. Naomi watched the Potomac River glide beneath the wing. Only a week earlier, this city had felt like home. Now, it felt strangely unfamiliar. Not unwelcome. Simply smaller. Monday morning arrived with its familiar rhythm. Glass conference rooms. Fresh coffee. Laptops opening in practiced unison. Inside Brooks' strategic advisory, the senior partners gathered around the walnut boardroom table. Market reports, economic forecasts, regional risk analyses. A year of research had led to this meeting. Marcus Ellison looked around the room. Let's begin. Naomi connected her laptop to the presentation screen. The first slide appeared. Asia Expansion Strategic Recommendation. She spoke with the same calm confidence that had earned the respect of every person in the room. No flourish. No salesmanship. Only evidence. The Asia-Pacific market now represents nearly 38% of projected growth among our multinational clients over the next decade. The next slide appeared. Regional infrastructure, talent availability, legal frameworks, transportation corridors, government incentives. One city after another was evaluated. Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Seoul. Every recommendation was supported by data. Every conclusion by months of research. For nearly an hour, no one interrupted. When the presentation ended, silence settled over the room. Marcus folded his hands. Questions. One partner leaned forward. If we open in Asia, are we prepared to support it long-term? Naomi answered immediately. We aren't opening a satellite office. She looked around the room. We're establishing a regional headquarters. The distinction mattered. So we build it to last. Another partner adjusted her glasses. Why Seoul? Naomi clicked to the final slide. A simple photograph of the Seoul skyline at sunrise. No charts. No bullet points. Just the city. Our clients need access to Northeast Asia. She continued. Seoul offers political stability, exceptional infrastructure, an educated workforce, world-class technology, and direct access to markets across the region. She paused. But that's only part of the answer. The room remained attentive. Cities matter, but relationships build businesses. I spent the past several weeks meeting people who believe in long-term partnerships rather than short-term transactions. She smiled faintly. That philosophy aligns remarkably well with our own. Marcus leaned back thoughtfully. So, he looked toward the other partners. If we removed every personal connection Naomi made during this trip, would your recommendation change? The room grew quiet. Naomi didn't hesitate. No. If I had never met a single person in Seoul, I would still recommend building our future there. Marcus nodded once. Exactly the answer he'd hoped to hear. The partners excused Naomi while they deliberated. She stepped into the quiet hallway. A floor-to-ceiling window overlooked downtown Washington. People hurried below. Deadlines, meetings, lunch appointments. Life continued at its usual pace. She folded her arms and watched the city. Without intending to, her thoughts drifted thousands of miles away. She imagined the Han River at sunset, the narrow streets lined with hammocks, the small stationery shop, a quiet courtyard where tea had slowly grown cold because conversation had mattered more. She smiled, then caught herself. This is business, she whispered. And it was, truly was. Nearly 40 minutes later, Marcus opened the boardroom door. Naomi. She returned to the table. Every partner was standing. Marcus looked around the room before speaking. We've reached a unanimous decision. A beat. We're moving into Asia. No applause. Only quiet satisfaction. Then he looked directly at Naomi. And we're establishing our regional headquarters. He allowed the moment to linger. In Seoul, a wave of pride passed through the room. Months of work had become a defining moment in the firm's history. Marcus extended his hand. Congratulations. She shook it. When do we begin? He smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. The next slide appeared on the screen. Not market projections. Project timeline. Brooks Strategic Advisory. Seoul Regional Headquarters. Site selection. Lease negotiations. Regulatory approvals. Staff recruitment. Architectural planning. Operational launch. Marcus closed the folder in front of him. I'd like you to lead it. Naomi blinked. You'll relocate to Seoul for the build-out. Another partner smiled. And if everything goes according to plan, permanently. The room fell quiet, not because anyone questioned the decision, because everyone understood its significance. Naomi looked once more at the skyline beyond the windows. Only days ago, she had left Seoul believing she was saying goodbye. Now, she realized she had simply been coming home by a different route. That evening, she stood alone in her apartment. Suitcases rested in the corner of the bedroom, not yet unpacked from her last flight. She looked at them for a long moment, then smiled to herself. I guess we're not finished yet. She lifted the smaller suitcase onto the bed. This time, she packed differently, not for a business trip, but for a future she had spent years unknowingly preparing to build. Some journeys begin with excitement. Others begin with commitment. The early morning flight descended through a blanket of soft clouds. Below, the Han River curved gracefully through the city. Glass towers reflected the first light of dawn. Neighborhoods stretched toward distant mountains. Naomi looked through the window. This time, she wasn't wondering what Seoul might become. She already knew. Inside the cabin, the captain's voice echoed softly. Welcome to Seoul. Naomi smiled almost instinctively. The words no longer sounded like an arrival. They sounded like a return. Incheon International Airport moved with its usual quiet efficiency. Travelers hurried toward reunions. Business executives answered emails before reaching immigration. Families laughed around luggage carts. Naomi walked confidently through the terminal. No conference badge. No hotel reservation. No return ticket scheduled. For the first time, her passport carried more than a destination. Carried intention. Outside, a familiar black SUV waited. The driver stepped forward with a respectful bow. Ms. Brooks. She recognized him immediately. Mr. Choi. He had driven her several times during her previous visit. She smiled warmly. It's good to see you again. And you, Ms. Brooks. He opened the rear door. I've been asked to take you to your residence. She paused. My residence? He nodded politely. Your firm's temporary apartment has been prepared. Naomi climbed inside. The phrase lingered in her thoughts. My residence. Not my hotel. Not my accommodation. Home, however temporary. As the vehicle crossed the bridge into the city, she watched Seoul awaken. Students hurried toward universities. Shop owners raised steel shutters. Cyclists followed the river paths. Construction cranes reached into the morning sky. Everything felt wonderfully alive, not waiting for her, simply welcoming her into its rhythm. Meanwhile, high above Gangnam, Min-jun stood inside his office overlooking the city. Ji-yoon entered carrying the morning schedule. Ms. Brooks landed safely. He looked up. I assumed she had. Would you like me to arrange? No. His answer was gentle, not abrupt. She has a company to build. Ji-yoon smiled knowingly. And you'll let her? I admire her too much not to. She nodded. It was exactly the answer she expected. Naomi's temporary apartment occupied the upper floors of a restored contemporary building overlooking the Han River. The design blended modern glass with warm oak and natural stone. Minimalist, elegant, quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a generous balcony where the city stretched endlessly beyond the water. She stepped inside. Sunlight filled every room. Boxes bearing the firm's logo stood neatly stacked in the living area. Architectural plans rested on the dining table. A welcome arrangement of white orchids sat beside a handwritten card from Marcus. Build something extraordinary. She smiled. I intend to. The next several days unfolded in a rhythm that felt both exhausting and exhilarating. Office spaces were toured, commercial leases negotiated. Government officials welcomed Brooks' strategic advisory into the city. Universities discussed internship partnerships. Local consulting firms explored collaboration. Naomi moved effortlessly between English and carefully practiced Korean greetings, earning appreciative smiles wherever she went. She listened more than she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, took careful notes. Every meeting reinforced what she already believed. This wasn't simply a market. It was a community she wanted to become part of. One afternoon, standing inside an unfinished office overlooking the river, Naomi unrolled the architectural plans across a temporary table. Her sole project team gathered around. "I don't want this office to feel like an American company renting space in Korea." The room fell quiet. "I want it to feel like Brooks' strategic advisory belongs here." An architect nodded thoughtfully. "What does that look like to you?" Naomi considered the empty floor. "It looks like honoring where we are. Natural materials, local artists, books, a tea room where conversations don't have to end because meetings do." Several people smiled. One designer quietly wrote every word. Across town, Jiun entered Min-jun's office carrying an invitation. The Cultural Preservation Council would like to thank Brooks' strategic advisory for sponsoring the Restoration Symposium. Min-jun glanced at the invitation. "Ms. Brooks deserves the credit. They've invited both of you." He looked at the date. Saturday evening. He smiled almost imperceptibly. "I suppose our calendars will overlap again." That evening, Naomi stood alone on her balcony. The city shimmered beneath her. The air carried the faint sounds of evening traffic, distant conversations, and the river moving steadily through Seoul. Her phone vibrated. A message. "Kang Min-jun. Welcome home." Nothing more. No invitation. No expectation. No assumption that she was free. Just 2 words. Naomi read them twice, then looked out across the skyline. A slow smile spread across her face. She typed a reply. "Thank you." She paused, then added one more sentence. "It's beginning to feel that way." She pressed send. Across the river, Min-jun's phone vibrated. He read the message, then quietly set the phone aside. He didn't need to answer. Some conversations were complete exactly as they were. 2 balconies, 2 lives, 1 city stretching between them. For the first time, the distance no longer feels like separation. It feels like possibility. Relationships are rarely built by extraordinary moments. More often, they are built by ordinary days repeated with extraordinary consistency. 3 weeks passed. The Brooks Strategic Advisory Office slowly transformed from architectural drawings into reality. Walls were painted. Furniture arrived. Technology was installed. Local hires joined the growing team. The office no longer felt temporary, felt lived in. Naomi moved through each day with quiet purpose. Morning site meetings, afternoon negotiations, evening design reviews. She learned the names of contractors, remembered the receptionist's daughter's university entrance exams, celebrated when permits arrived ahead of schedule. The office reflected the same philosophy she brought to every relationship. People first. Everything else followed. Across town, Min-jun's calendar remained as relentless as ever. Board meetings, foundation initiatives, international investors, government consultations. Yet somewhere within those crowded days, a new rhythm quietly emerged. Every Thursday morning, a message arrived. Coffee? Sometimes it came from Naomi, sometimes from Min-jun. Neither kept score. The cafe never changed. A quiet place overlooking a narrow side street lined with ginkgo trees. No photographers. No executives trying to impress one another. Just 2 people sharing 45 uninterrupted minutes before returning to lives filled with responsibility. One Thursday, Naomi arrived first. When Min-jun entered, the owner smiled warmly. "Your friend is already here." He inclined his head politely. "Then I'm the one who's late." Naomi looked up from her notebook. You are exactly 2 minutes late. I hope you'll allow for traffic. She smiled. I've decided not to. He laughed softly. I'll do better. The owner placed tea before Naomi, coffee before Min-jun. Neither had ordered. It had simply become understood. They talked about everything except work. A documentary Naomi had watched. A new museum exhibit opening in Busan. A favorite childhood book. The way autumn would soon begin changing the mountains surrounding Seoul. Minutes slipped past unnoticed. As they prepared to leave, Naomi noticed the owner smiling to himself. What? The elderly man shook his head. Nothing. He glanced toward Min-jun. You smile more these days. Min-jun looked genuinely surprised. Do I? The owner nodded. It suits you. Naomi lowered her eyes to hide her smile. Elsewhere, Marcus Ellison arrived in Seoul to review the office before its official opening. He spent the morning touring the nearly completed space, inspecting conference rooms, meeting new staff, reviewing budgets. Everything exceeded expectations. Late that afternoon, Marcus found Naomi standing alone on the balcony overlooking the Han River. You've built something remarkable. She smiled. We all have. He joined her at the railing. After a comfortable silence, he asked quietly, Are you happy here? Naomi answered without hesitation. Very. Marcus nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. She looked at him curiously. I've known you a long time, Naomi. He smiled. You've always been successful. But, he searched for the right words. I don't think I've seen you this settled. Naomi considered the observation. I hadn't noticed. I think everyone else has. That evening, across the river, Jiun joined Min-jun as he reviewed plans for the foundation's upcoming scholarship ceremony. She closed the folder. May I ask you something? You usually do. She smiled. When was the last time you took an entire Sunday off? He thought for a moment. I honestly don't remember. You have one this week. I do. I cleared it. He looked up. I don't recall asking you to. You didn't. She folded her hands. I took the liberty. He studied her for a moment before smiling. I assume you have a reason. I do. She tilted her head ever so slightly. I think there may be someone who would appreciate your company more than another board meeting. He laughed quietly. You've become surprisingly bold. I've worked for you for 12 years. She smiled. I know when you're happier. Sunday arrived beneath clear blue skies. No board meetings. No investor calls. No gala invitations. Just a text message. From Naomi. I've discovered a weekend market you haven't shown me. A reply came moments later. Then I'd better correct that oversight. The market overflowed with flowers, handmade ceramics, books, woven baskets, fresh fruit, and musicians performing beneath rows of white tents. Neither Naomi nor Min-jun hurried. They wandered, browsed, sampled local honey, shared roasted chestnuts wrapped in paper, paused to watch a young calligrapher teaching children how to hold a brush. Naomi watched a little girl carefully paint her first character. The child frowned. It's crooked. The elderly calligrapher smiled. So are all first attempts. Naomi looked toward Min-jun. He was already watching her. Not the child. Her. She smiled. He smiled back. No words were needed. As the afternoon faded into golden light, they crossed a small stone bridge overlooking a quiet stream. For a few moments, neither spoke. Naomi finally broke the silence. Do you realize? We've stopped trying to impress each other? Min-jun considered the question. I think. He smiled. We stopped some time ago. She nodded. I think you're right. They continued walking, shoulders brushing lightly for the first time. Neither stepped away. Neither acknowledged it. Some things, when they arrive naturally, need no explanation. The first leaves of autumn arrived quietly, almost unnoticed. A single crimson maple standing among endless green. Cooler evenings, longer shadows. Morning air carrying the faint scent of pine drifting down from the surrounding mountains. Seoul was changing, almost imperceptibly. just as their relationship had. Saturday arrived without meetings, without conferences, without deadlines. Naomi had planned to spend the morning reviewing architectural renderings for the new office. Instead, her phone chimed. Kang Min-jun, would you like to leave the city for a few hours? She smiled. Where are we going? His reply came almost immediately. Somewhere that reminds me who I am. An hour later, they were driving north through winding mountain roads. The skyline gradually disappeared behind them. Concrete became forest. Glass towers gave way to ancient pines. The conversation flowed as easily as the landscape. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they simply admired the view. Neither felt compelled to fill every silence. Eventually, the road narrowed to a traditional stone entrance framed by centuries-old Zelkova trees. Beyond it, a beautifully preserved Hannock estate rested against the mountainside. Slate roofs, carved wooden beams, a lotus pond reflecting the afternoon sky, rows of carefully tended chrysanthemums beginning to bloom. Naomi looked toward Min-jun. You grew up here? He nodded. My grandparents did. And after my parents passed away, he paused. They made certain I never felt like I had lost a home. Naomi didn't offer sympathy. She knew him well enough now to understand he hadn't shared the memory seeking comfort. He had shared it because he trusted her with it. Instead, she simply said, They must have loved you very much. His smile carried both gratitude and memory. They did. An elderly woman stepped onto the wooden veranda. She wore a simple cream hanbok and carried herself with quiet dignity. Her face brightened the moment she saw Min-jun. You're finally here. He bowed respectfully. I've been reminded that you've been waiting. She laughed softly. You always make even an apology sound thoughtful. Turning toward Naomi, her eyes warmed immediately. And you must be Ms. Brooks. Naomi bowed politely. It's an honor to meet you. The woman reached for both of Naomi's hands. The honor is mine. I've heard you've been helping our city. Naomi glanced toward Min-jun with playful suspicion. You've been talking about me. He looked almost embarrassed. Occasionally. The housekeeper smiled knowingly. More than occasionally. Inside, the home felt timeless. Bookshelves lined the walls. Family photographs rested beside ceramic vases. Brushes and inkstones occupied a low writing table near the window. Nothing felt curated for visitors. Everything felt lived in. Naomi wandered toward a black-and-white photograph displayed near the study. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, standing proudly beside an elderly man holding a calligraphy brush. Min-jun joined her. My grandfather. She smiled at the photograph. I can see it. He believed handwriting revealed character. And what did he say about yours? Min-jun laughed quietly. That I pressed the brush too hard. She raised an eyebrow. Did you? I thought strength came from force. And now? He looked toward the mountains beyond the window. Now I know it comes from control. After lunch, the housekeeper excused herself to tend the gardens, leaving Naomi and Min-jun to wander the estate. They followed a narrow stone path toward a small pavilion overlooking the valley. The breeze carried the sound of bamboo leaves brushing together. Naomi stopped. It's beautiful. It was my grandfather's favorite place. She rested her hands on the wooden railing. I understand why. After a long silence, she asked quietly, Do you come here often? When I need perspective. She looked toward him. Does it help? He nodded. This house has a way of reminding me that whatever burden feels impossible, someone before me carried one of their own. Naomi absorbed the words. She could sense there was more beneath them, but she also knew he wasn't ready to explain. And she didn't ask. Respect had become its own language between them. As they prepared to leave, the elderly housekeeper handed Naomi a small cloth-wrapped parcel. You forgot something. Naomi looked surprised. I don't think I did. The woman smiled. You admired this after lunch. Inside, Naomi found a handcrafted wooden bookmark. A single maple leaf had been delicately carved into its surface. I couldn't possibly. You can. The woman's voice was gentle. This home has always believed that guests should leave carrying something beautiful. Naomi looked toward Min-jun. You planned this. He shook his head. I truly didn't. The housekeeper laughed. He forgets that kindness existed before he did. As they drove back toward Seoul, the mountains slowly disappeared in the rearview mirror. The skyline returned. Lights began to flicker across the city. Naomi turned the carved bookmark over in her hands. I think I understand something now. Min-jun glanced at her. What? She smiled. I've spent weeks getting to know Kang Min-jun. She looked back toward the fading mountains. Today, I met the people who made him possible. For a moment, neither spoke. There was nothing to add. Some truths arrived complete. Cities are built with steel. Businesses, with vision. But homes are built one quiet moment at a time. The final artwork was placed on the reception wall just before noon. The last computer came online. Fresh flowers arrived. The Brooks Strategic Advisory plaque was carefully mounted beside the entrance. Months of planning, weeks of construction, hundreds of decisions, had become something tangible. The Seoul Regional Headquarters was ready. Employees gathered in the central atrium. Local partners mingled with colleagues from Washington. Architects, contractors, university representatives, government officials. The atmosphere was warm rather than formal. People weren't celebrating a building. They were celebrating the beginning of a chapter. Marcus Ellison stood beside Naomi. He looked around the office with quiet satisfaction. You were right. She smiled. About what? Not treating this as an American office. He nodded toward a Korean artist explaining the meaning behind one of the commissioned paintings. It belongs here. Naomi looked around the room. That was always the goal. Marcus studied her for a moment. You've done more than build an office. You've built trust. That evening, the celebration had ended. The last guests drifted toward waiting cars. The office grew quiet. Naomi lingered alone in the reception area. She turned off the final lights one by one. Only the glow of the city remained beyond the windows. A soft chime echoed from the elevator. The doors opened. Min-jun stepped out. No suit jacket, just a charcoal sweater beneath a tailored overcoat. In one hand, a small paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. You missed the speeches. I wasn't invited. You didn't need one. He smiled. I know. He lifted the bag slightly. I thought successful openings deserved dessert. A few minutes later, they stood together on the office terrace. The city stretched endlessly before them. Min-jun handed her a small pastry dusted lightly with sugar. I've never celebrated an office opening with pastries. Perhaps you've been celebrating incorrectly. She laughed. I'll keep that in mind. They leaned comfortably against the railing. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence no longer required explanation. It had become one of the ways they communicated. Naomi finally broke it. When I first came to Seoul, I expected to leave with market research. She looked toward the skyline. I didn't expect. She stopped. Min-jun waited patiently. You don't have to finish the sentence. She smiled. I know, but I want to. She drew a slow breath. I didn't expect to find somewhere that feels. Again she searched. Possible. Min-jun looked out over the river. My grandfather used to say that every meaningful decision begins long before we recognize we've made it. She turned toward him. What do you think he meant? I think. He smiled softly. Sometimes our hearts arrive before our minds are willing to admit it. Naomi lowered her eyes. There was no embarrassment, only recognition. I've been trying to convince myself this move was only about work. He looked at her. And was it? She smiled honestly. It started that way. A gentle breeze lifted a loose strand of her hair. But somewhere along the way, Seoul stopped feeling like a project. It started feeling. She looked at him. Like somewhere I wanted to wake up. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city seemed to fade into the background. Min-jun finally answered. I've spent years believing my life had already taken the shape it was always going to take. He looked toward the lights reflecting across the Han River. I wasn't looking for anything to change. He smiled to himself. And then one afternoon, someone asked me why I built a foundation. Naomi laughed softly. I ask a lot of questions. You ask the right ones. She looked at him with quiet affection. And now, he met her gaze. Now, I find myself wondering what the next 20 years might look like. The words settled gently between them, not as a declaration, as an invitation. Naomi stepped closer, only enough that there was no longer a comfortable distance between them. I've been wondering the same thing. For the first time since they met, there was nothing left to hide behind. No conference, no project, no tea ceremony, no architecture, no foundation event. Just two people who had slowly become essential to one another. Min-jun reached up slowly, not to pull her closer, only to brush a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered against her cheek for the briefest moment. A question, not an assumption. Naomi answered by gently placing her hand over his. Their eyes never left each other's. She smiled. So, I think we've finally run out of reasons to pretend this is only friendship. He laughed quietly. I believe we have. The distance between them disappeared. Not hurriedly, not passionately, but with the certainty of two people who had already chosen each other long before either found the courage to acknowledge it. Their first kiss was gentle, unhurried, almost reverent, carried weeks of conversations, shared silences, tea growing cold, morning messages, walks through hidden streets, mountain air, a carved maple bookmark, two notebooks waiting to be written. When they finally stepped apart, neither spoke, neither needed to. Some promises are made without words. As they stood together overlooking the lights of Seoul, Naomi slipped her hand into his. This time, neither let go. The Han River below, the Seoul skyline glowing into the evening. Two people standing side by side not because fate forced them together, but because, day by day, they had quietly built something worth choosing. For the first time, neither of them wondered what came next. They should have.